Picture this. Bill Gates, the billionaire philanthropist who went from running Microsoft to running global health initiatives, wakes up one morning to find out his big mosquito project just got the boot. Not from a committee, not from a quiet bureaucrat hiding behind emails, but from Captain Ibrahim Traore, the fiery 36-year-old leader of Burkina Faso, who doesn't exactly specialize in sugarcoating. Traoré didn't just politely pause the program. He didn't say, "Thanks for your help, but let's revisit this later." Nope. He came down like Thor with a hammer. Orders were issued, samples were destroyed, the Target Malaria project, poof, gone, overnight. That's not just a ban, that's a political mic drop. Now, why does this matter? Well, this wasn't some backyard science fair project. We're talking about a Gates Foundation-funded initiative with deep pockets and global ambitions. The plan? Engineer male mosquitoes that can't reproduce properly, release them into the wild, and watch the malaria-carrying mosquito population dwindle. The science is bold, the money is massive, and the stakes? We're talking life and death. Malaria kills over 600,000 people a year, most of them children under 5 in Africa. If successful, this project could have been revolutionary. So why would a country fighting malaria, one of its deadliest enemies, slam the brakes on a project that claims to be the cure? Traoré's decision wasn't about tiny bugs. It was about big power. See, Burkina Faso isn't just some neutral lab ground. It's a nation with a government that recently pivoted hard against Western influence. Traoré, who came to power in a 2022 coup, has been reshaping the country's alliances, cozying up Russia and distancing itself from France, its former colonial power. Against that backdrop, Gates's project doesn't just look like science. It looks like Western intervention. And in Traoré's world, Western intervention is the ultimate villain. Let's be honest, there's a narrative here that's easy to sell. Rich billionaire funds foreign experiment in Africa. African leader says, no thanks. Who's the hero? Depending on who you ask, you'll get very different answers. Some will call Traoré reckless, shutting down a potentially life-saving innovation. Others will hail him as a protector, shielding his country from being a guinea pig in a billionaire science lab. And Traoré knew exactly how to frame it. This wasn't just policy, it was performance. In one order, he positioned himself as the leader who refuses to bow to outside agendas, even if those agendas come wrapped in mosquito nets and promises of saving lives. The optics? Powerful. The timing? Perfect. It fits right into his broader narrative of sovereignty, independence, and Burkina Faso first. But here's where it gets spicy. Traoré didn't just stop the project. He made sure to destroy the samples. Think about that for a second. Scientists had spent years collecting, modifying, and testing those mosquitoes. Poof, gone, overnight. That's not just a ban. It's a symbolic bonfire. It's like saying, not only are we rejecting your project, we are erasing it from our soil entirely. That's not cautious skepticism. That's a hard line in the sand. And let's not forget, mosquitoes aren't just bugs. They're political pawns now. The moment Traoré shut the door, he wasn't just talking about malaria. He was talking about ownership of science, control of narratives, and the eternal question, who gets to decide what experiments happen in Africa? For him, the answer was clear. Not Bill Gates, not Target Malaria, not some European lab. Only Burkina Faso. Now, whether that's wise or disastrous depends on your lens. Supporters argue that African nations have been used as testing grounds for Western projects before, sometimes with devastating consequences. Skeptics argue that rejecting cutting-edge science in the middle of a malaria crisis is like refusing a fire hose while your house burns. Both sides have a point, but Traoré wasn't interested in nuance. He was interested in sovereignty. So yes, the bold ban was dramatic, it was theatrical, it was political, but most of all, it was calculated. In one move, Traoré killed a project, flexed his authority, and sent a message that echoed far beyond Burkina Faso. We're not your lab rats. Not anymore. But the question is, was this really about mosquitoes? Or was it about power, politics, and a not-so-subtle jab at the West? Let's crank up the microscope and zoom into fact 2, sovereignty and anti-Western fervor. All right, let's be real. If you think Ibrahim Traore banned Bill Gates' mosquito project just because of science concerns, you've missed the plot. This isn't only about malaria. It's about sovereignty, power, and a growing wave of anti-Western pushback sweeping across Africa. And Traoré, he's surfing that wave like it's the finals of a political surf competition. See, Traoré didn't rise to power in some quiet democratic election with balloons and campaign speeches. Nope, this guy rolled in during a 2022 coup promising to clean house and kick out the old guard. He's young, fiery, and very much aware that his political survival depends on one thing: keeping Burkina Faso's people convinced that he's the leader who won't bow to outside influence. Now enter Bill Gates, the billionaire philanthropist whose name carries both admiration and suspicion. On one hand, he's the guy who made personal computing mainstream. On the other, he's become the poster child for ultra-wealthy Western intervention in global health. So when a Gates-backed project rolls into Burkina Faso with genetically modified mosquitoes, to Traoré, it's not just about bugs. It's about symbolism. And here's the kicker. Africa's history with Western experiments is messy, sometimes catastrophic, from medical trials with questionable consent to economic policies pushed by foreign powers. The narrative of Africa being used as a test ground is painfully familiar. So when Traoré bans the GMO Mosquito project, he's not just rejecting science, he's rejecting centuries of perceived meddling, exploitation, and control. Let's put it bluntly. This was a political power play dressed up as public health caution. By saying no to Gates, Traoré wasn't just flexing his muscles at mosquitoes. He was flexing at Washington, Paris, London, Brussels, and every other power center that thinks it can dictate Africa's future. And it plays beautifully with his brand. Remember, Traoré has already kicked French troops out of Burkina Faso and is warming up to Russia, which positions itself as the anti-West partner of choice for African governments tired of colonial hangovers. Banning the Gates project? It's just another brick in the wall he's building between Burkina Faso and the West. Now, here's where it gets spicy. For ordinary Burkina-Faso citizens, this move feels like sovereignty in action. Think about it. For decades, policies, projects, and even aid programs often came with fine print written in Paris, Washington, or Geneva. Suddenly, they're watching their leader stand up to one of the richest men alive and say, "No thanks, we'll handle our own mosquitoes." It's nationalism wrapped in science policy, and it resonates. Of course, not everyone's cheering. Critics argue that this kind of knee-jerk anti-Western stance risks throwing out genuinely helpful innovations. Malaria isn't some distant threat. It's an everyday killer. By rejecting the project outright, Traoré might be winning short-term political points while risking long-term health consequences. It's the classic sovereignty versus pragmatism dilemma. But let's be honest, Traoré knows his audience. He knows his people are tired of being told what's best for them by outsiders. He knows suspicion of Western motives is sky high, and he knows that in the chessboard of geopolitics, siding with Russia and giving a side-eye to the West is a surefire way to cement his image as the leader who puts Burkina Faso first, even if it means burning bridges. So, was this about mosquitoes? Maybe a little. Was it about malaria? Sure, that's in the mix. But really, this was about sovereignty, about a young leader drawing a line in the sand and telling the world, you don't get to use my country as your lab. Not anymore. But if you think this was just politics in disguise, let's get nerdy for a second. Because to understand why this ban shook the science world, we need to know what the project actually was. Time to break down Target Malaria in Fact 3. All right, let's hit pause on the politics for a sec. Before we crown Traoré as either the mosquito-slaying hero or the reckless villain, let's answer the obvious question. What on earth is Target Malaria? Think of it as science's version of Thanos, except instead of snapping away half the universe, it's trying to snap away half the mosquito population. Founded in 2012, backed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Target Malaria's mission sounds simple. Genetically modify mosquitoes so they can't reproduce properly, release them into the wild, and watch the population of malaria-carrying bugs crash. In theory, it's brilliant. Malaria, after all, is a nightmare. It kills over 600,000 people every year, most of them in Africa. And unlike some diseases where prevention is as easy as a vaccine or clean water, malaria is tricky. It's spread by mosquitoes that breed like it's their full-time job. No matter how many nets, sprays, or pills you use, those little vampires keep coming back. So scientists thought, hey, instead of fighting the symptoms, why not take out the source? Now, let's be clear. Target Malaria didn't just start dropping mutant bugs from airplanes like it's a Marvel villain's plan. No, this was years of research. Scientists worked in carefully controlled labs, tinkering with mosquito DNA using CRISPR and other gene-editing wizardry. They created male mosquitoes designed to pass on traits that either sterilized their offspring or skewed the gender balance so heavily toward males that future generations fizzled out. Step 1, prove it works in a lab. Check. Step 2, test small releases in controlled environments. Double check. Step 3, expand into real communities with approval from local authorities. And that's where Burkina Faso came in. In August 2019, Burkina Faso became the first African country to approve a release of genetically modified mosquitoes. It wasn't a swarm, just a few thousand sterile males, kind of like a scientific pilot test. The idea wasn't to wipe out malaria overnight, but to prove the approach was safe, effective, and feasible outside of a petri dish. And at first, it seemed promising. Scientists reported no environmental disasters, no sudden swarms of mutant superbugs, no angry villagers with torches and pitchforks. It was all calm, measured, and, boring, which, in science, is exactly what you want. So why the backlash? Well, for one thing, the science may be meat, but the messaging was messy. Many locals complained that they didn't fully understand what was being released in their backyards. Activists called the process opaque. Rumors flew. Were these mosquitoes really safe? Were Africans being used as test subjects for a Western billionaire's experiment? And once that narrative took root, no amount of scientific jargon could kill it. Let's be honest. If you live in a rural village and someone says, hey, we're about to release thousands of genetically modified mosquitoes into your environment, but don't worry, they're harmless. Are you sleeping soundly that night? Probably not. You'd be locking your windows, lighting 5 mosquito coils, and side-eyeing every buzz in the air. So while Target Malaria was hailed as groundbreaking in Western labs and conferences, in Burkina Faso, it was often viewed with suspicion. And suspicion, especially in a political climate already skeptical of foreign influence, is like gasoline waiting for a match. Enter Traoré with his anti-Western stance and nationalist rhetoric. Suddenly, Target Malaria wasn't just a science project. It was a symbol of foreign control. That's why Traoré's ban hit so hard. It wasn't just killing a mosquito project. It was killing a decade of research, millions in investment, and the idea that science alone could bulldoze politics. Because if Burkina Faso, the pioneer country, was now out, what did that mean for Target Malaria's future in Africa? And here's the irony. For all the noise, Target Malaria wasn't even at its full rollout yet. The releases in Burkina Faso were still small-scale, early-stage tests. The real project, mass releases designed to actually suppress malaria transmission, was years away. But the symbolism of pulling the plug now, that was enough to shake confidence worldwide. So, what is Target Malaria anyway? At its heart, it's a bold scientific gamble to end one of humanity's deadliest diseases. But in the eyes of its critics, it's also a gamble with ecosystems, ethics, and trust. And when you add a fiery leader like Traoré into the mix, science becomes less about DNA and more about diplomacy. All right, so we've established that Target Malaria is basically science's attempt to play matchmaker with mosquitoes. Except instead of love stories, the ending is population collapse. Sounds cool on paper, right? But here's the thing. When you start tampering with nature at the genetic level, you also start tripping every ethical alarm bell imaginable. And guess what? People in Burkina Faso, and around the world, were hearing those bells loud and clear. First up, the ecological what-ifs. Messing with one species can ripple through entire ecosystems. Kill off a chunk of mosquitoes, and you might save lives from malaria, but what about everything that eats mosquitoes? Fish, frogs, birds, bats? Basically half the animal planet lineup. Scientists argue that other insects can fill the ecological gap. Critics counter with, yeah, but what if they don't? Because once you've released GM mosquitoes, there's no undo button. You can't call them back with a recall notice like defective toasters. And then there's the Frankenstein factor. The word genetically modified doesn't exactly scream warm and fuzzy to the average person. For a lot of people, it screams Jurassic Park. You know, the part where scientists say, don't worry, we've thought of everything. And then a T-Rex is chasing you through the kitchen. The idea of unleashing modified insects into the wild, even with good intentions, triggers deep gut-level fears. Now, let's talk ethics. Critics accuse Target Malaria of being too opaque, not communicating clearly with the communities where they were releasing these mosquitoes. Yes, there were consent processes. Yes, there were official approvals. But ask villagers on the ground, and many said they didn't really understand what was happening. Some felt decisions were being made for them, not with them. And in societies where distrust of Western motives is already sky high, that lack of clarity looks less like science and more like neocolonialism with a lab coat. And that word, neocolonialism, is the nuclear bomb of this debate, because it taps into centuries of history where Africa was used as a testing ground, whether for experimental medicine, economic policies, or straight-up resource grabs. Critics looked at Target Malaria and saw echoes of that history. Foreign labs designing the mosquitoes, Western money funding the project, African villages hosting the trials. It didn't matter how many scientists insisted the project was safe. To skeptics, the optics were damning. And then there's the slippery slope argument. If we accept genetically modified mosquitoes today, what's next? Modified crops, modified livestock, modified people. Okay, maybe that last one sounds like sci-fi, but the fear is real. Once you normalize genetic tinkering with the environment, it's hard to draw lines. And critics were quick to point out that we still don't fully understand long-term ecological consequences of releasing GM organisms. It's one thing to do this in a lab. It's another to let it loose on the African savanna. Supporters of the project counter with cold, hard math. Malaria kills hundreds of thousands every year. Isn't that bigger of risk than potential ecological shifts? But skeptics respond with an equally sharp question. Why should African nations bear the brunt of that risk while the science is still experimental? If this is such a great idea, why not test it in Florida or Paris? Why always Africa? And here's where the ethical critique goes full throttle. Many activists argue that projects like Target Malaria reflect a deeper imbalance in global health research. The money, the labs, the control, it's all Western. The risks, the unknowns, the consequences, they're all African. That doesn't feel like partnership. It feels like outsourcing risk. So Traoré's ban then wasn't just about rejecting a science project. It was about rejecting a dynamic where his country is the lab bench for Western experiments. Whether you agree or not, that's a powerful narrative to sell at home. So yes, Target Malaria had scientific promise, but it also carried ecological unknowns, ethical blind spots, and historical baggage heavy enough to sink the project under its own weight. And when a leader like Traoré wanted to score political points, those red flags weren't just reasons, they were ammunition. But let's be honest, politics loves a good excuse. And while ecology and ethics made for great talking points, Traoré's decision was also a cold strategic move. Time to pull back the curtain on the political calculus in Fact 5. All right, here's the tea. Science is rarely just science. It's politics in a lab coat. And when Ibrahim Traore slammed the door on Bill Gates' GMO Mosquito project, this wasn't just a health decision. It was a calculated political maneuver designed to score points at home, strengthen alliances abroad, and send a neon-lit message. Burkina Faso isn't playing by the West's script anymore. Let's set the stage. Traoré didn't come to power with balloons, campaign rallies, and get out the vote ads. He came in via a 2022 coup, promising to kick out corruption and take back control from foreign hands. He's 36, one of the youngest leaders in the world, and he knows that his legitimacy doesn't rest on a democratic mandate. It rests on showing strength, independence, and sovereignty. Every move he makes has to scream, "I'm in charge. Burkina Faso is in charge. No more babysitters." Now, banning a Gates-backed mosquito project might seem like a niche policy move, but politically, it's a masterstroke. Here's why. 1. The anti-colonial narrative. Burkina Faso, like much of Africa, has lived under the long shadow of colonial history. France, in particular, looms large. Traoré has already booted French troops, torn up defense agreements, and repositioned his country as a sovereign actor. Banning Target Malaria fits perfectly into that anti-colonial storyline. It paints Traoré as the leader who doesn't just fight foreign soldiers, he fights foreign science projects too. That's a political win in any neighborhood. Domestic approval. Let's be real. Malaria is deadly, yes, but public distrust of foreign experiments runs deep. By banning the project, Traoré tapped into that well of suspicion and turned it into fuel for his own popularity. He's essentially saying, "I'm protecting you from outsiders who think you're their test subjects." That's a political win in any neighborhood. Global positioning. Traoré isn't just cutting ties, he's making new ones. Russia has been courting African nations with open arms, offering security assistance, weapons, and the sweet promise of, "We'll treat you as equals, not colonies." By rejecting a Western-funded project, Traoré strengthens his pivot toward Moscow and other non-Western allies. In the chessboard of geopolitics, this is Burkina Faso flipping its rook straight into the Kremlin's lap. And theatrics. And let's not underestimate the drama. Traoré didn't just ban the mosquitoes, he ordered the samples destroyed. That's political theater at its finest. It's not just a no, it's a never again. Imagine the imagery, petri dishes and mosquito cages literally wiped out like a symbolic cleansing. It's a PR goldmine. Of course, this wasn't without risks. Critics warn that Traoré is playing a dangerous balancing act. Sure, it wins him points domestically and earns him cheers from anti-Western allies, but it could also cost Burkina Faso future access to international funding, aid, and partnerships. When you slam the door this hard, sometimes it doesn't reopen. But Traoré seems willing to take that gamble. Because here's the thing. Politics is about timing, and right now, anti-Western sentiment is trending in Africa like it's the latest TikTok dance. From Mali to Niger, juntas and nationalist leaders are finding that telling France, the U.S., and their partners to take a hike plays extremely well with citizens tired of being told what's best for them. Traoré knows this. He's cashing in. And by choosing something as symbolic as mosquitoes, he got maximum political mileage with minimal immediate fallout. Think about it. Banning a security agreement is messy. Cutting trade deals is complicated. But banning a lab project with creepy GM bugs? That's an easy headline that makes him look strong without sparking an economic meltdown. It's Politics 101. Choose a fight you can win and make it look epic. So yes, the ban was about malaria, ecosystems, ethics, sure. But mostly it was about power. It was about a young leader cementing his image as the anti-Western defender of national sovereignty. And let's be honest, when you're trying to survive in the cutthroat game of African geopolitics, you don't just play defense, you flip the board. But here's the catch. While Traoré was busy scoring political points, malaria wasn't taking a break. So what does this bold ban mean for actual public health? Let's talk life, death, and mosquito nuts in Fact 6. All right, let's strip away the politics, the anti-West speeches, and the billionaire science drama for just a second. Because behind all of that noise lies the real monster in this story: malaria. And if mosquitoes are the henchmen, malaria is the supervillain that's been haunting Africa for centuries. Here's the cold hard truth. Malaria kills over 600,000 people every single year. Let that sink in. That's like wiping out an entire city the size of Luxembourg every year. And the cruel part? Most of those victims are kids under the age of 5. Imagine toddlers fighting off fevers, seizures, and organ failure because of a single mosquito bite. It's horrifying. And it doesn't stop there. Malaria isn't just deadly. It's expensive. Entire economies bleed money fighting it. Families spend savings on treatments, communities lose productivity, and governments pour millions into prevention campaigns. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, malaria drains billions of dollars annually. It's not just a health issue, it's an economic straitjacket. Now, here's the kicker. For decades, the fight against malaria has been like playing a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. Nets? Helpful, but not foolproof. Sprays? Effective, but mosquitoes adapt. Drugs? Life-saving, but parasites evolve resistance faster than you can say superbug. Every time we think we've cornered malaria, it finds a new escape route. That's why the Target Malaria project was such a big deal. It wasn't just another Band-Aid solution. It aimed to go after the root cause. Wipe out the mosquitoes, wipe out the disease. Bold, clean, game-changing. That's why global health experts were hyped. That's why Gates was writing checks. And that's why Traoré's ban felt like such a gut punch. Because here's the uncomfortable truth here. While Traoré scored political points for sovereignty, real people are still dying every day. Kids are still being carried into clinics with high fevers. Mothers are still losing babies. Villages are still stuck in the cycle. And now, one of the most innovative, if controversial, projects on the table has been shut down. Of course, let's not romanticize Target Malaria as a silver bullet. Even its supporters admit it's experimental and success wasn't guaranteed. There are risks, there are unknowns. But in a fight this deadly, some argue that not trying is the bigger risk. Imagine being told, we might have a tool to save your child from malaria, but politics said no. That's a hard pill to swallow. This is where the debate gets raw. On one side, the sovereignty argument. No nation wants to feel like a guinea pig. On the other, the human cost. Every year of delay means hundreds of thousands of lives lost. How do you balance those skills? Is protecting your political independence worth slowing down a fight against one of the deadliest diseases on Earth? Traoré clearly thinks so. He's betting that other solutions, like traditional prevention methods, better healthcare infrastructure, and non-GMO innovations, can pick up the slack. But history shows those alone haven't been enough. Malaria has been haunting humanity for thousands of years. It's resilient, it's deadly, and it doesn't care about sovereignty. So, yes, the ban made for great headlines and political theater. But on the ground, in Burkina Faso's clinics and villages, it leaves a big question mark. Was this a bold stand for independence or a dangerous gamble with human lives? Only time will tell. One thing's for sure, malaria isn't waiting for politicians or billionaires to figure it out. It's still biting, still spreading, still killing. And that's the tragic irony here. While leaders argue over sovereignty and scientists argue over ethics, the mosquitoes don't need anyone's permission. But now that Burkina Faso has slammed the door, where does that leave Target Malaria itself? Are they packing up their lab coats for good, or just shifting the battle to a different battlefield? Let's find out. So, the samples are destroyed, the project's been banned, and the headlines are buzzing louder than the mosquitoes themselves. But what about the people behind the project? The scientists, the labs, the funders? Did they pack up their petri dishes and fly home in defeat? Not exactly. Let's start with Target Malaria itself. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. We're talking about a global consortium of scientists from some of the world's most prestigious research institutions: Imperial College London, the University of Oxford, African research centers in Mali, Ghana, Uganda, and yes, Burkina Faso. These folks have spent the better part of a decade fine-tuning mosquito DNA, chasing grants and writing scientific papers longer than IKEA instruction manuals. So when Traoré ordered their samples destroyed, you can imagine the collective gasp echoing through labs worldwide. Years of work, gone. Millions of dollars in funding, up in smoke. But here's the thing about scientists. They're stubborn. Their official response wasn't a dramatic meltdown. Instead, it was diplomatic to the core. They emphasized respect for sovereign decisions and promised to continue their mission in other partner countries. Translation, okay, Burkina Faso, we'll leave, but this isn't the end. And let's be real. Target Malaria isn't going to fold because of one ban. They've got operations in Ghana and Uganda, both of which have been cautiously moving forward with research and community engagement. The project has also been developing in controlled facilities across Europe. So the mosquitoes may have been squashed in Burkina Faso, but the idea? It's still very much alive. The Gates Foundation, meanwhile, isn't exactly known for backing down either. Bill Gates has poured billions into global health projects. Vaccines, sanitation, eradication campaigns. He's been called stubborn, visionary, meddling, heroic. Take your pick. But the one thing he isn't is easily discouraged. Losing Burkina Faso hurts, no doubt, but for Gates and his foundation, this is just one front in a much larger war against malaria. And billionaires don't like losing wars. Now, let's zoom out. For the broader scientific community, this ban was a reality check. For years, researchers have dreamed of gene editing as the magic bullet for everything from crop resilience to disease eradication. But Burkina Faso's decision was a reminder. Science doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in communities, in politics, in cultures. And if you don't have local trust, you don't have a project. Period. Target Malaria has been trying to pivot on this front. They've been emphasizing community dialogue, transparency, and local leadership in their messaging. But critics say that's still not enough, that the power dynamics are too skewed, the risks too concentrated in Africa, and the benefits are too abstract for people who just want to know their kids won't die from a mosquito bite tomorrow. So where does this leave them? Well, the short answer, regrouping. Burkina Faso was supposed to be the flagship, the proof that GM mosquitoes could be released responsibly in Africa. Losing that flagship stings, but the project's leaders are framing it as a temporary setback rather than a fatal blow. They're likely to double down on other African partners, strengthen their PR game, and maybe, just maybe, try to re-enter Burkina Faso in the distant future if political winds change. Here's the irony, though. In some ways, Traoré's ban may have given the project more global attention than it ever had before. Most people outside of science circles had never even heard of Target Malaria. Now, it's front-page news. The GMO mosquito debate is trending, Twitter's making memes, and suddenly everyone from activists to armchair scientists has an opinion. It's a PR nightmare, but also a PR opportunity. Bottom line, Target Malaria isn't dead. It's just shifting battlegrounds. The question is whether they can rebuild trust in Africa, or whether this ban becomes the domino that topples the whole effort. But while scientists pack up their bug jars and Gates strategizes his next move, there's a bigger lesson lurking in all this. It's not just about mosquitoes. It's about who gets to call the shots in global health. Let's wrap it up with the big picture in Fact 8.
All right, let's zoom out one last time. Forget the lab coats, forget the buzzing mosquitoes, forget even the smoking wreck of Traoré's political theater. Because at the core, this story isn't just about insects. It's about something far bigger, the tug-of-war between global health ambitions and national sovereignty. Here's the paradox. Malaria doesn't respect borders. It doesn't check passports. It doesn't care about your politics. A mosquito can cross from Burkina Faso to Ghana faster than a smuggled SIM card, which means that if you really want to end malaria, you need a global effort. Scientists, funders, governments, all working together. But here's the flip side. Sovereignty is sacred. No nation, especially one with a history of colonial exploitation, wants outsiders parachuting in with experimental projects and saying, "Trust us, we know what's best." Because too often, history has proven they didn't. From medical trials without consent to exploitative economic aid, the scars are real. So when Burkina Faso says no, it's not just about the mosquitoes. It's about dignity, autonomy, and control. This is the eternal tension. Global problems require global solutions, but local trust determines whether those solutions can ever take root. And Target Malaria walked straight into that tension. The science may have been cutting edge, the intentions may have been noble, but the optics screamed foreign project, foreign money, foreign control. Let's be honest, global health has a PR problem. For decades, it's often been framed as wealthy nations and billionaires swooping in to save the global south. And while those efforts have absolutely saved lives, they've also created a dynamic where local voices feel sidelined. That's the sore spot Traoré hit with a hammer. And this isn't just an African issue. Around the world, communities are increasingly skeptical of outsiders telling them what to do in the name of science. Look at the backlash to vaccines, the debates over genetically modified crops, or even climate change policies. People don't just want solutions. They want ownership of those solutions. They want a seat at the table, not just a polite pat on the head. So what's the lesson here? It's not that global health projects are bad. It's not that local sovereignty should always override scientific ambition. The lesson is that if you want to solve problems that affect millions, you can't bulldoze over the people you claim to help. You have to earn their trust. And earning trust is slow. It means listening more than lecturing. It means being transparent, not opaque. It means making sure communities understand the risks and benefits, not just signing off on a document they don't fully grasp. It means shifting from a top-down model of "we're here to fix you" to a partnership model of "we're here to work with you." If Target Malaria had nailed that, maybe the story would look different. Maybe Traoré wouldn't have the political ammunition to ban it. Maybe Burkina Faso could have been the hero of malaria eradication instead of the headline for shutting the door. But that's not what happened, and now the project has to live with that reality. At the end of the day, this isn't just about mosquitoes or malaria. It's not the future of global cooperation. Because malaria isn't the only global threat on the horizon. Think pandemics, climate disasters, food insecurity. And if nations don't trust the people bringing solutions, those solutions won't stick, no matter how much money or genius is behind them. So yes, Traoré's ban was bold. Yes, it was political. Yes, it left scientists scrambling and Bill Gates scratching his head. But it also sent a message the world needed to hear. Science without sovereignty is just colonialism in a lab coat. And if we want to build a healthier future, we can't ignore that. So what do you think? Was Traoré protecting his people from a risky experiment or blocking a breakthrough that could have saved lives? Drop your take in the comments because this debate isn't going away anytime soon. And hey, if you like unpacking the messy crossroads of science, politics, and power, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and join us here at Global Pulse News. Because sometimes the tiniest mosquito tells the biggest global story.